Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Running the Gauntlet. We are still working our way through the gauntlets located within the Curse of the Vampire DLC expansion, and today we will be moving on to the level 20 Deadliest Prey Gauntlet. And this one is fairly similar to the one that we saw before, where it has 4 separate legs, so we're going to break them down as well as the requirements that you need to get all of the loot from this gauntlet. So before we jump into things, make sure you check to see if you're subscribed. If you're not, take a moment and feel free to do so, as that subscription is free and easy, and there's content coming to you on a daily basis. Also, drop a like if you feel like this video or any of the others in the series have been helpful. So this first leg of the gauntlet is fairly straightforward, as it's the sequence of the statues towards the end of the Shadowland Temple that you need to position in the adequate positions and then progress on to the Kingpin fight. Still triggers in the same amount of hand enemies as you do so, and the added quirk to this is that there is increased ability damage, reduced damage of every other type, except energy attacks are strengthened, which mainly applies to abilities in and of themselves. I went ahead and applied the standard speedrunning tactic here, pre-positioning all of the blocks, putting them in order to whiz through this and get into the second phase. And while I'm waiting for the section of the fight to finish out, I do want to briefly talk about one of the clear conditions that is required to get all of the available loot from this, and it's just like every other gauntlet that you've ever seen, where you need to clear the gauntlet once by getting through all 4 legs. That's how you get the first clear condition. That will trigger in a reward of 148 shield emblems that you can then use in the in-game DLC Storm. The end phase of this fight with Kingpin, it's fairly straightforward. It's similar to what you know and love, with the added quirk that you are going to want to rely on ability and synergies to deal your damage, as abilities still count as the primary damage source even if you use them in a synergy format. So that really helps out quite a bit. As you can see, any ability or synergy attacks that we throw out just chews right through Kingpin's health bar, even while he still has some of his stagger meter active. Getting into the second phase here, this is similar, if not identical, to what you've seen before. Same attacks from Kingpin as his standard in-game boss fight. I do employ a strategy of using Dr. Doom to take advantage of the energy attacks that he has available to him as his abilities. As you can see here, the energy beams that we launch out across the arena chew right through not only the stagger but also the health bar of Kingpin, and all of the grunts that run into us as well really take a beating as they get caught in the crossfire there. And with that, we've got this leg of the gauntlet finished out. And that takes us into the second leg, which is a little more straightforward, where you have increased damage every minute. You've got 25 enemies that you've got to take out, 3 minutes to do so, and any and all projectile attacks are strengthened as you seek to take out these enemies. Every single enemy you encounter here will be of the Mighty class, and they range in their appearances of being Ultron Sentries to Outriders to even a few Sentinels that pop up as well. Now, one thing that this phase may be beneficial for, especially as it gets down to the lower end of that timer, is allowing you to get the second clear criteria out of this in order to gain another 148 shield emblems. And that is the objective of dealing 250,000 or more damage with extreme attacks, especially where your extreme attack damage is amplified in this section rather than being reduced from the previous section. This would be a fine place to make the decision to use your synergy attacks to meet that criteria. It's fairly simple, especially if you let them all rip at the same time. Typically, you can get upwards of 750,000 damage or more, especially depending on the concentration of enemies that you have. Personally, I tend to find that most of the time I end up detonating all of my extreme abilities at once for that AX Alliance attack, it does get me or net me about 1,000,000 or so, if not always more than that, provided that there's no reduction to the attack damage that I'm receiving from any sort of gauntlet or rifts, quirks that may be applied to that fight. We're making pretty good progress through here. Does feel a little bit weird when compared to the previous segment, because the previous segment does have the added quirk of us replenishing our energy to throw out abilities and synergies a little more quickly. So you do have to get used to not being as reliant on having your abilities refresh as frequently as they otherwise would. But you can get through this fairly easily as long as you've got a high enough leveled team walking into that fight. The third leg of this gauntlet is, again, basically a shot-for-shot remake of what you would expect from the main clearing through of the Avengers Tower, at least through to the room where Wasp is unlocked as a playable character, the living room area. The quirk with this fight that you need to keep in mind is increased damage for every enemy on both sides of the playing field, and in addition, any melee attacks, specifically the abilities that have a melee attribute, are strengthened in this section of the fight. But this puzzle room is fairly straightforward. I do really like how the timer pauses here as they give you a look of the overlay of the ground that you are dealing with. It really makes things quite nice and convenient as you work your way through it. But this gives us a prime opportunity to talk to the third clear condition that you need to keep in mind for reaping max rewards from this gauntlet, and that is dealing 2,000,000 or more damage with synergy attacks. And that is a very important distinction, that you cannot just have damage applied from your own abilities. It has to be deployed in the format of a synergy. That being said, with the previous segment and this segment having increased attack damage to some extent, it's really not that difficult to do. You can probably even get this on your first run through, as long as you can balance the proper use of your synergy attacks and which members of your team that you've put together have those synergies, and being able to plan accordingly to get the most benefit out of them as you progress through the level progression here. And this does have a time limit on it, but this time limit is very forgiving in comparison to some of the other ones that we've seen. So you really don't need to worry about falling behind or not meeting the criteria on that, especially where it's just 23 enemies here at the end. That is the actual requirement in terms of enemies that you need to take out over the course of this leg of the gauntlet. Every other fight leading up to this is optional, with the exception of needing to activate the terminal in the previous puzzle room to progress over to this point. That's really the only other mandatory portion that you need to be aware of. And the fourth and final leg of this gauntlet is the run killer, if you're not careful. As the quirk of this fight is, not only do you have to fight Blade at the end, where you would normally otherwise encounter Ultron, but you only have a minute on your timer, and you need to defeat enemies in order to gain time back onto your timer. So just be mindful of that. I've found that Dr. Doom does quite well, especially with his Energy Bolt attack, in terms of taking out some of the smaller grunt characters and adding to the time that we have. Now, this is the real tricky spot that you need to be cautious with, because there are only a select amount of enemies that will pop in that you can then take a benefit from and adding more time to your timer. And there are 2 terminals that you need to deactivate in order to progress out of this room. One of which being required in order to access the other one, and then you've got to backtrack quite a ways in order to deactivate the other one. Luckily, you still gain time back onto your timer with the enemies that your teammates take down while you're doing this. So as long as you come into here with about 45 seconds, a minimum is my recommendation on the timer, you can get through this and progress into the next section, which is another combat area, which has more Ultron sentries for you to take out, and thus increase the timer that you have on your on this portion of the gauntlet. Now, The final clear condition that we need to discuss is not one that you're going to be able to get on the first or even second clear of this gauntlet run, because you need to defeat 600 enemies. The nice thing is once you've defeated this gauntlet, you can loop back around through it to make sure that you can meet that final cap. This section is one of the better ones to gain a high amount of enemies defeated, but the real area that's going to provide the most amount of help is making the most of your abilities in that first section with the Kingpin fight at the Shadowland Temple here. So at this stage, we've got about 45 seconds still on our timer, gaining a little bit more to work with as we walk our way to the final platform to fight against Blade. The only other quirk with this fight that we haven't really touched on yet is you have increased damage on your piercing attacks. My team, I think the only person that really has any piercing attribute to any of his attacks is Wolverine, but it's not an overall requirement here, as this last section we've got about 30 seconds, and that's more than enough, especially with Doctor Doom, as Doctor Doom is a very high-powered character. He took out the remainder of the grunts that had spawned in there in one fell swoop, getting us over that 1 minute timer, and then continuing to use our energy bolt attack here will make a very short work of Blade's health bar. As you can see that it's just constantly draining there as we progress through the end of this, and that gets us to all the things that you need to know when trying to clear out this gauntlet. So thanks again for watching. Again, if you're enjoying this series, feel free to leave me a like, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy my content as it comes to you on a daily basis from a couple of different games. I'm having a lot of fun with these and a bit scared of some of the upcoming gauntlets that we'll have to work through, but if it's beneficial to you, then it's worth my time having a look at them. So thanks again for watching, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day.